Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for your patience. We did advertise that we were going to be starting the presentations at 5:30, so here we go. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the launch of this exciting new report, which you should all have in your hands, Miles Better, Improving Public Transport in the Glasgow City Region. For those of you who are old enough, I hope you appreciate the pun in the title. This report sets out a route map for how we can deliver a fully integrated and publicly controlled urban transport network for our region over the next few years. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ellie Harrison. I am one of the co-founders and the current chair of the Get Glasgow Moving public transport campaign. We're a volunteer-run group which was established in 2016 to campaign for a world-class, fully integrated and affordable public transport network for our region, where our buses, our trains and our subway are planned and coordinated to work together as part of one seamless system, which makes it easy for everybody to get around. So I want to start tonight by thanking Councillor Angus Millar, who's in the front row here. It's because of Councillor Millar that we've got access to this beautiful room, the Satinwood Suite here at City Chambers this evening. And Councillor Millar's going to be joining our panel later to offer his reflections on the report. Before then, I just want to say a few words about how the report came into being and to set out...
Recording in progress.
To set out... what did I want to say? And just to let you know what the agenda is going to be for tonight. So, Centre for Cities, I'm sure many of you are aware, are a very well-respected economic think tank that are based in London, and they explore ways in which to improve the performance of city regional economies across Britain. So they recommend a variety of measures for improving cities' economies, including improving public transport networks to ensure that all citizens can easily get around and make the most of jobs and opportunities. So, Centre for Cities first came to our attention at Get Glasgow Moving when they published this report in 2021, Get on Board, Why Mayors Should Choose Franchising. So this report sets out clearly why England's mayoral combined authorities, places like Greater Manchester, Liverpool City Region, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, why they should choose the franchising power that is available to them under England's Bus Services Act in 2017. Centre for Cities argue that it presents the best value for money and it offers far better outcomes in terms of delivering fully integrated public transport than the so-called partnership model, which is the alternative. So, this time last year, we were invited by Pass for All, and hopefully we have somebody from Pass for All in the room tonight, to apply for a grant through the Smarter Choices, Smarter Places Open Fund. And we saw that as a really great opportunity to be able to invite Centre for Cities to Glasgow to work on a similar report looking at the opportunities now available to Scottish transport authorities in the new Transport Act 2019. And those powers are finally going to become available on the 4th of December this year. We've only been waiting for 4 years, but better late than never. So we are delighted. We were delighted to be awarded the grant, and we began work on the report in the spring. You should all have a copy in front of you, hopefully. And we're really excited to be able to share the findings of the report with you tonight, because there could not be a more crucial time to be looking in detail at these bus governance issues. Because, as I said, the new powers in the Transport Act will soon come on stream, and SPT, our Regional Transport Authority, is currently developing the new Strathclyde Regional Bus Strategy, which will decide the future bus policy in our region for the next 15 years. And SPT plan to make a decision on which powers to proceed with early next year, and we're delighted to have Bruce Kiloh from SPT here this evening, who will be able to talk more about that process during our panel discussion. So first to our agenda for this evening. And unfortunately we have had to adjust things slightly from what we advertised because we just found out yesterday, which was a very stressful day, that Andrew Carter, the Chief Executive of Centre for Cities, who is meant to be here in person this evening, unfortunately has just caught COVID. So is not here, which is a real shame. Hopefully he will be well enough in 2 weeks' time, because he's got another visit to Scotland planned. We're organising a parliamentary briefing on the report at the Scottish Parliament on the 8th of November. So hopefully Andrew will be back on form and he'll be at that event. If anybody's interested in coming to that, please do email, because I'm sure we can get you in if you're particularly keen to meet Andrew. But at the very last minute, Matthew Coombes, who is a researcher at Centre for Cities, one of the co-authors of the report, has agreed to step up and give us a Zoom presentation, which we're hoping is going to work very smoothly, about the findings of the report. So I'll hand over to Matthew very shortly, but just to then go over the rest of the agenda, following Matthew's presentation, we'll go straight into a panel discussion and then a Q&A with everybody in the room, which is going to be chaired by Stewart of the Herald. We're very pleased to have her here with us tonight. Very grateful for her time, she's incredibly busy. And we have panellists, as I mentioned, Councillor Angus Millar, Bruce Kiloh from SPT, and Bailie Christy Mearns, who is Glasgow Green Councillor and their spokesperson for transport, as well as a member of the SPT board. In the absence of Andrew Carter, I'm also going to participate in the panel discussion and be able to answer more direct questions about the report. So, without further ado, keep your fingers crossed, this is going to work smoothly. I am going to go like this, and Matthew's going to appear, and he's going to give you a presentation. Fingers crossed.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time. So if you don't know who we are, just very briefly, the Centre for Cities is a research organisation that looks at how cities contribute to our national economy. And Glasgow is a crucial part of the Scottish economy. There we are. So we know that Glasgow contributes to 20% of Scotland's economy. We also know it's Scotland's largest urban area. But what we don't talk about as much is how much it contributes to Scotland's lost potential. So we estimate Scotland's lost potential, economic potential that is, as about £10 billion every year. Glasgow contributes to 7 billion of that 10 billion pounds every year. And you can see that in your chart in the report on page 12, but you can also see it here. You can see there we've got Glasgow, Dundee in the small urban rural areas. Dundee contributes about 500 million of that lost output gap, and the smaller urban and rural areas contribute to the remaining 2.3 billion. And we're not including Edinburgh and Aberdeen in those smaller urban areas. We're not trying to avoid any local rivalries either. But basically, Edinburgh and Aberdeen both perform as we would expect for cities of their size. And I think it only strengthens the argument that an investment in Glasgow is actually an investment in Scotland and a more prosperous UK as an extension of that. But what role does public transport play in this? And you can see this chart in page 7 of your report. But actually, Glasgow performs pretty well in terms of public transport network size when compared to other British cities. If we look there, we can see that it's actually larger than Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, and Sheffield. It doesn't perform at the same size as Birmingham and London, but there should be no surprise. They're cities of a larger geographical footprint. And also, we shouldn't be surprised that Glasgow has a large footprint. It has a subway system, and it also has a large heavy rail system. And those are key assets that let Glasgow stand out compared to many of its British counterparts. However, Glasgow, like many other UK cities, doesn't perform as well compared to European cities. And this chart is just below the last chart on page 7. And what you can see here is that actually of the 44 cities that have been analysed across Western Europe, only 6 of them have a network size that is smaller than Glasgow. And for some of these cities, that's actually not too much of a problem. We know that European cities, when you're on holiday walking down nice boulevards, avenues, that they're a lot denser. So if we look at somewhere like Turin or Seville, that they're actually a lot more dense. So it means that even though they have a smaller network size, it means that they connect more people. But when we look at cities such as Munich, we can see that actually they have a much larger network size, and they're also able to move a lot more people. And this is important because when we're talking about cities, we need to be focused on that actually we need to be looking at their labour markets. And if we can move more people into Glasgow, connecting residents of Glasgow with economic opportunities across Glasgow, then it doesn't just make it beneficial for them, but it also makes it beneficial for the wider economy. So what these first few slides have shown is that while Glasgow can celebrate that it's better than other British cities, that actually Glasgow and other UK cities don't compete very well with European peers. So when we looked at this report, what we were looking at is actually how do we improve the transport network? And there's always a lot of flashy news around rail and tram, and buses might be considered the ugly cousin of these projects, but actually most public transport users in Glasgow and in Scotland use bus networks. And what we should be really looking at is that if we want to make relatively quick gains, not building huge infrastructure projects, that we can actually looking at the bus network and how we improve that. And this graphic is on page 14, if you're struggling to see it. But basically how we've looked at this is that, okay, we've got 2 major ways that we can improve our bus network. We can look at our existing routes, but we can also look at setting new routes. And that's basically the methodology the report looks at. And we say, okay, if we're looking at existing routes, how can we improve them? So we've looked at increasing frequencies. So those services that do currently run, if they were to run quicker, how many of those residents could we make better connected? But we've also said, okay, because Glasgow has this unique assets in terms of its heavy rail infrastructure, but also its subway, if we made the buses complementary to the rail system and integrate them, then how many more residents could we connect? And I think it's important that we stress that is that with a greater labour market, we can make the Glasgow more prosperous. And again, as we've outlined at the start, Scotland more prosperous. So this map here is on page 17 of your report. Just in case it's a bit smaller for anyone, and I'm a map nerd, so I always love looking at these things. But we can see that actually its coverage is good. I mean, it's compared to the UK cities, its coverage is good. It extends beyond the city authority, and we can connect some residents outside. However, when we start comparing it, as we say again, to the European peers, that we're not getting there. So this area, while we see that splodge in the middle and some of those islands connected on the outside, this covers about 900,000 people, just under 900,000 people. But when we started modeling, and I should actually just define that there. So this area covers what we've said is well-connected residents. So well-connected is what we've defined as in the report as people who can readily access public transport. So how we've defined that is if they can use a bus or rail, one service to get into the urban core. And that bus has to run every 15 minutes, and also the rail service has to run every 30 minutes. And why we've done that is because if public transport is going to be a viable alternative to private transport, then we think it has to be reliable and it has to run often enough that people choose to make that choice. So when we started modeling, and this chart map here is on page 20, and it shows the impact, some of the modeling that we've done. So basically what we've looked at here is that, okay, if we could run the bus services that currently run more frequent and regularly at every 15 minutes, how far would that get us? But we've also said, okay, if we can integrate bus and rail together, how much further we would get. And just in case there's any questions of how we've modeled that, we've said, okay, if you're using rail to leave the Glasgow urban core, and then you stop at a station and then you get on a bus for the remainder of your journey, how far could you get? And I think it's just important to know when we've modeled that, we've also said there's a 5-minute gap just in between. So we recognize that it's not just a Doctor Who teleport between the train and the bus. We realize you're going to have to get off the train, probably barge a few people out of the way and click out the ticket barriers. So what we can see here, though, is that even though that Glasgow has a good coverage, that we can extend that to beyond into the wider region. And this is where we start seeing those gains. In terms of numbers, how have we quantified this? So like I said before, in the current state of the transport network, Glasgow actually covers about 900,000 people. What we're saying is if you were to increase frequencies, that actually you would add about 210,000 people. So those journeys which might be covered by an express service at the moment, and it might run maybe every hour or every half an hour, or actually doesn't run during peak hours, if we say, if those journeys were running, where would we get to? And actually it makes a considerable difference, and you can add 210,000, which is actually about a 25% increase on the number of people just by increasing the frequencies. And I think it's important to recognize that we're not talking about huge transport infrastructure changes here. We're talking about organizational changes that can make Glasgow run better. But also on top of that, when we started looking at rail integration, we see that we can add another 90,000 people. So overall, we're talking a difference here of about 300,000 people that we think we could make well connected into the Glasgow transport system. And that's about 1/3 of people we can add back into there, and also 1/3 of people that we try and convince that actually public transport can work and can be a viable alternative and provide them a good service. But we've also looked at setting new routes. And for this, we've looked at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. So this chart here is on page 21, if you can't see it from the back. And we're setting new routes. We could have looked at numerous different routes. I'm sure everyone has a wish list of routes. I mean, I would love to be able to get the cheap bus all the way across London, but that's certainly not possible. But if we look in terms of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, we see that actually there's about 200,000 people at the moment who can access the hospital within 30 minutes. This is partly due to the fact that there's some industrial land around Queen Elizabeth, but also the fact is that the nearest rail stations are about a 20-minute walk, 20-minute walk from the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So actually what we're saying is here is that if you were able to model new routes and actually provide new routes that could connect the hospital to surrounding areas, we say we could actually increase that up to 350,000 people. And that's a 50% increase. And we've used a social asset here, not just because they're important, and also because residents had noted in the SPT regional transport survey that healthcare was something that they struggled to access. But also it shows that we're setting new routes can also have a big difference in reaching communities that are currently not connected with. We're also reaching economic hotspots, which can help drive Glasgow's performance. So I think what these graphs are showing us is that there's a considerable prize here, that Glasgow not only is underperforming, but also that there's actually a very large, tangible residence base that we can connect across Glasgow, and it's worth doing so. And how we've thought about how to structure this and how policymakers should think about the changes that will come is that we thought of sort of a three-phase plan. And we know these changes don't come overnight and that they take time. We think in phase one that the SBT should lead on the bus franchising. And we think this is important because SBT currently exists and has the institutional capacity to do so, as it's already running some bus services and has control of the subway. But also, when you look at the local authority, and we've set this out in the report, that you see large volume of commuting between different local authority areas. So that's why we think it should be at the SPT level where the franchising occurs. But we also think that Scottish Government has a role to play. We've seen across the UK and in other European countries that central government will step in. I mean, across the UK, you can see through the city region transport settlements that the UK government has been actually more generous than usual in providing capital funding for transport projects. And you can see UK government has also supported Manchester in setting up a franchising. So we believe that actually Scottish government should put up front for a 10-year long investment deal that helps the region gets its transport network back into shape. And while this is happening, we think that in phase two, that local authorities, SPT and Scottish government need to consider and agree actually how it's going to be funded and operated in the long term. Even if you take somewhere like London with TfL, while TfL is able to cover its commercial budget, it's not able to cover its capital budget. And we see this even in other European cities. If you look at Tallinn, while it has an income levy to support its transport network, it also requires a central government subsidy. So what we think is, while there are funding deals going on, the Scottish government with SPT and local authorities need to decide, okay, how are we going to fund this? And in the report, we lay out some options around some of the powers that are currently used in the UK and elsewhere. That includes the income tax levy, also includes business rates, precepts, along with the council tax precepts, but also a workplace parking levy or congestion charge. And these are all things that, whatever the funding mix, the local authorities and SPT and Scottish government decide upon, that they need to be considered. And from that, if any necessary government agreements are needed, i.e. who's going to collect the money, who's going to raise the money, or additional powers needed, then that should also be decided at this point. But in the longer term, in phase three, we think there's a real opportunity here to actually capitalise on what Glasgow has, what a lot of UK cities don't, and that's really that heavy rail network. And we think there's a real opportunity here for Glasgow to consider how it devolves its local rail services from ScotRail as part of the transport body that will run the network. And we think that's really important, not just because it helps with integration and helps connect people into the wider labour market. We also think that's really important because it offers some chance of funding. We know that a lot of the land around stations could be used for residential purposes, so that increases density, but also they could be used for commercial purposes as well, whether it's advertising or any other pop-up shops you often see on these sort of places. So we think it's a real opportunity for Glasgow to actually be able to fund its franchise network in the longer term and actually make Glasgow a more prosperous place, and in the longer term, helping Scotland and an extension, the UK economy, reach its economic potential. So thank you very much for your time. You can explore the report on the website. And also, as I'm not there in person, as Ellie's already alluded to and Andrew's COVID strike down, if there's any further questions, here's my email, but it's also on the first page of the report. So please do get in touch. And if there's any questions, like I say, we're always happy to answer.
So my name is Catriona Stewart, and I'm currently writer at large at the Herald, and prior to that I was chief reporter at the Glasgow Times. So public transport is something that I've been writing about for a considerable amount of time. At the Glasgow Times, it was obviously crucial to our leadership as a campaigning newspaper, and a newspaper with the best interests of Glasgow at heart, so that's what we aim for. And then at the Herald, I take a sort of more Scotland-wide approach to transport, but Glasgow, Scotland City is obviously still crucial as well. As well as a professional interest in public transport, I also, of course, it's not entirely altruistic. I live in Glasgow, I travel around the city, I pay my now controversial frozen council tax, so I'm personally invested in having a good public transport system. I'm someone who cycles everywhere, I take the bus frequently. I remember when I moved into my flat in the south side about 10 years ago, it was 90 pence each way into the city. I think I'm 1.3 miles on the bus, and now it's £5.40. So, you know, I feel that as much as the next person. And I also grew up in Australia. I grew up in Sydney, so despite my new strong Scottish accent, I had an experience of living in a city where there is an integrated transport system. We have ferries, we have heavy rail, we have buses, we have one ticket to travel around on everything. And I would really love it if both of the cities that I call home benefited from the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everybody on the panel just to introduce themselves and maybe give some short reflections on the report, and then I have a few questions that I'm going to ask, and then I will open up the Q&A to the floor. If you do have something that's more of a comment, do try and make it a question by the end. And I'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then work out who best to fire them at, just so that we can take as many questions in a short space of time as possible. Ellie, you've already done an introduction, so I don't think I'll come to you unless you're desperate to shoot something else. Do we have another microphone? Do just this one. I'll come to you, Angus, just because you're next to me.
Is that okay now? Yes, I think that is. Thanks very much, and thank you, Catriona. Yes, my name is Cllr Angus Millar. I am the City Convener for Transport at Glasgow City Council, and I'm very pleased to be here to join you today. I think the report that's been published and that's been presented, I think speaks to many of the challenges that we're well aware of in terms of public transport in the city. I think your points around the lack of integration, which I think while improving slowly is a continuing challenge. I think that really dates back to the deregulation and privatisation of transport a number of decades ago now. And some of the ongoing challenges that we have as a result of that, as well as wider difficulties and challenges within the transport markets in the city, are things that we very much are engaged with as part of our Glasgow transport strategy, the second part of which is actually currently out to public consultation, which is due to conclude in the coming days. So I think in that sense this report is a welcome contribution to the conversation on the future of public transport within the city, and I think it speaks to many of the issues that we need to grapple with some urgency and alacrity in order to continue to take that forward. In terms of the findings, in terms of franchising, Glasgow City Council for its part is committed and has been since last year to exploring the use of franchising powers when we have between ourselves, the public local authority, and SPT as the regional authority when those powers are enacted, with the legislation coming available. And indeed, I'm aware, as has been reported today, that SPT are in position to take forward options appraisal for that as part of the regional bus strategy. I think though any discussion of governance and reform to bus governance in the city needs to be focused really on outcomes. What are the improvements that we want to see within the bus network in the city, and that really is going to require the full business case appraisal process, the full business case development process to be taken forward. And I think what is one of the quite welcome points as part of this report is that there is a recognition that that process in and of itself, as well as the wider operation of any potential franchising model in the future is going to require considerable public investment from national level, and I think that needs to be teased out very much as part of that business case development process, but we can't lose sight of the fact that under any governance model, transport really requires investment in order to see those improvements that we all want to see. I also think we need to recognise the considerable time that's likely to be required to complete that bus governance process. As part of the first stage of our Glasgow transport strategy options appraisal work, the figure that was used there suggested that it could be up to 7 years to do the business case development for franchising. Now I should say that's based on the timeline and the experience that Manchester has gone through in terms of from them having the franchising powers available to actually then being able to get to the point that they are today of enacting them. It may very well be that other authorities elsewhere in the UK can learn from experiences and speed that up. But regardless, it is going to take time to do that, and we need to be making sure that we're making progress on some of those improvements that we all want to see to public transport in the meantime in Glasgow, and working with any and all stakeholders and operators to try and secure those improvements even as those conversations about governance take place and take place with some urgency. I think the contribution of the report to the discussion around potential revenue raising powers and potential revenue raising instruments that could be supporting public transport improvements and improvements to the network in future are welcome. That's something that I think we all need to engage with, beyond just looking to national government, which I think is necessary for financial support for any systemic improvements to public transport or systemic governance reform. We need to be thinking about how do we make that sustainable for the long term, and that is a major challenge and one that I think the report begins to grapple with. And finally, I suppose as a reflection, I think the focus at the end of the report, the final phase of the report, looking at how rail can be brought into the mix, I think is also very much welcome. Obviously, we are at the early stages of business case development around the proposed Clyde Metro scheme, and if we're looking at putting in new light rail infrastructure, integrating that with heavy rail infrastructure within the city, within a kind of suburban network, that all needs to be tied into any conversation around bus governance as well. It needs to be a fully integrated public transport network for the city and the wider region. And I think it's really important, therefore, that we don't lose sight of those other modes of transport when we're talking about bus as well. But overall, it's, as I say, a report that I think is a welcome contribution to the debate, to the discussion, and I look forward to engaging on these topics going forward.
Thank you very much. Hi everybody, my name is Christy Mearns. I'm a City Centre Councillor for the Scottish Greens and the Glasgow spokesperson for transport. I also do sit on the board of SPT, as was mentioned, but I'm not here in that capacity. And I will also say that I have just emerged from maternity leave to be here tonight, so I do hope you'll go easy on me, I'm sure you will. It is really wonderful to be here and to see so many people and to be continuing this really important discussion and conversation about public transport and how we make it better for everyone in our city. The conversation is more important than ever, and the need for better public transport more important than ever as well. We have made quite good progress on some of the quicker wins, such as electric buses, reintroducing some night buses and hopefully some more to follow soon, and on bus lane priority measures, for example, to name a few. We've also done some of the stick options. We've increased parking charges, we're progressing emissions-based parking permits, and we've got the bold ambitions for the future. The Clyde Metro has been discussed to transform the infrastructure into the future in the long term. But what we're missing is the shorter term measures, which I'm really glad this report does emphasise the need to do more on. Those measures that will make a meaningful difference towards increasing passenger numbers, offering affordable tickets, integrating journeys and tickets, and ensuring a minimum level of service everywhere. By not doing this now, we are leaving people behind, and we need to change that. The work must become a bigger priority. We've had frustrating delays to the Transport Scotland Act legislation, as we all know too well. But once this does become available, we cannot afford to waste any more time getting started and taking this work forward. And it is so encouraging that both Glasgow City Council and SPT have now committed to exploring these powers and taking this work forward once we do. Finally, I just want to say huge thanks to Centre for Cities and the work that's been done, and of course to Get Glasgow Moving for the tireless campaigning on these important issues that continues to be done. I hope that next time we do see you, we won't still be talking about how to fix these issues that we know exist in public transport. We'll be doing it instead, like many others who are overtaking us at the moment across Europe and also in the UK as well now. So, thank you so much.
Thanks, Catriona. Thanks to the Centre for Cities and Get Glasgow Moving for inviting us along today. It's a pleasure to be here and great to see such a big turnout to talk about public transport. I'm Bruce Campbell, Head of Policy and Planning at SPT. I've worked there for 25 years in various roles. Most recently, as I say, Head of Policy and Planning, responsible for regional transport strategy, the capital programme, regional bus strategy that's already mentioned amongst other things. About myself, I grew up in a family without a car. I'm a lifelong public transport user. I don't drive a car now, so I know what it feels like to be standing at a bus stop and the bus doesn't turn up. On a cold, wet November night in Easterhouse, I've been there. And it's important to recognise that. We at SPT believe in looking at things from the way the public would see it. Our journey is your journey, and all those kind of things are really important to us. So that's what drives us, and that's why we very much welcome this contribution to the debate. And the report itself, for two reasons, just raising the profile of public transport in the west of Scotland. It isn't good enough. It isn't good enough. I sit here as the Head of Policy and Planning in the Regional Transport Authority and say that to you. And I can say that to you not as an opinion, but with evidence. And our regional transport strategy that's just come out from the work we did on the case for change from the regional transport strategy. Everywhere we looked, there were problems. It wasn't sufficient for the people and communities of the west of Scotland, and that's why our new RTS, which is available on our website, along with all background documentation, reviews of policies across Scotland, the in-depth case for change, which I would strongly advise you looking at. It's got I believe it to be the most comprehensive review of the transport system in the west of Scotland for decades. It covers it across the board and makes sure it gets the message across. Transport isn't an end in itself. It's about healthcare. It's about the economy. It's about somebody being able to get to an apprenticeship. It's about all of those things. So there's a strong case there. We're also working on our stratified regional bus strategy that people have mentioned. We just had our case for change for that, go through our partnership board, on our website again. Stark, absolutely bleak report about the way that the system is at the moment. And that's not pointing any fingers at anyone, public operators, private operators or anyone. I know that the bus operators want to improve the network just as much as we do. And it's a joint fight to be able to do that. But as I say, the case for change was clear. We need to do something about bus in the west of Scotland and how we take that forward. And as people have said earlier on, we'll be bringing forward options through that process to our partnership in March. We are also, I can say, after that time, we will be undertaking public consultation to make sure that we're taking you with us on that journey. For wider points, the metro's already been mentioned. We're working closely with the City Council. My colleague Harjinder's across here tonight. Welcome to see him, Transport Scotland and others to take that forward. And that will be a long-term plan. It will seek a step change in public transport, and I can guarantee you the ambition that we have for the metro matches anyone in this room or beyond. We want Glasgow and the west of Scotland to have the transport system it deserves, so it performs amongst the best in Europe, if not the world. In terms of transport governance, very difficult, very challenging. That is to say, I've worked in transport for 25 years. I still don't get it. I still don't understand how it works in terms of who's responsible for what. And I think that's a really important thing for us to try and address. We put a policy in the new RTS which says that we'll look at transport governance with our councils. That's something we're committed to doing. We want to make sure that you, the taxpayer, as the passenger are getting the best value possible, the passengers of the rest of Scotland are getting the best service possible. I'll be quiet now, Catriona, come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone on the panel. I don't think it is really possible to overstate how important public transport is. It intersects with so many issues that are becoming ever more vital: the economy, health, people's ability to socialise and take part in leisure activities, the environment, crucially, as well. And as I mentioned, I've been writing about this for the best part of a decade, possibly more. And I do think that we have politicians who are saying the right things and who are coming from a decent place and do want improvements. You have bus companies that are is the time now to make things better.
Thanks, Kat. And I am an eternal optimist, and I should say, like Bruce, I don't own a car, I've never owned a car, and I never want to own a car, and that's one reason why I'm such a passionate public transport campaigner. Been involved in Glasgow Moving for the last 7 years as a volunteer, and it has taken over my life. But during that time, we have been lobbying the council, we've been lobbying SPT, and we've been lobbying the Scottish Government. We ran a big campaign at the Parliament when the Transport Bill was going through between 2018 and 2019. And we won that campaign to get the bill amended to allow for the additional power where SPT could set up a new publicly owned operator for Strathclyde, and we're encouraging them to do that. As has been mentioned, we've been waiting 4 years for the powers in that Transport Act 2019 to become available, but they soon will. So I feel like all the effort that we have put in over the last 7 years is just about going to come to fruition. Just one caveat, as has already been mentioned, franchising, bringing the bus network back into public control, re-regulating, all of these things are synonyms for the same process, what we want to happen, is a lengthy, it does take time. It takes time because of the legislation and all of the hoops that the Transport Scotland set out that transport authorities have to jump through in order to be able to regulate the buses. One of them is a public consultation. As Bruce mentioned, whether that's the actual public consultation that Bruce is talking about, or we're going to have another public consultation, I don't know. But the key public consultation on franchising will have to happen before we can go ahead. But yeah, I really feel optimistic. We can do it. We just need SPT to make the right decision and to take forward the recommendations of this report.
So, Bruce, what is the will like then at SPT? I mean, in your introductory few moments there, you mentioned that there's an acknowledgement, you said not good enough, there's an acknowledgement that public transport is not good enough. And I do feel that it doesn't matter who I speak to, at whatever level of government or in whatever organisation, that is acknowledged, and yet nothing ever happens.
Yeah, it's a daily struggle, Catriona, I think. I can assure you that from the chief executive down at SPT, from the chair of the partnership board, people like Christy here, when we have our discussions around the table, every single one of us is passionate about public transport. There's some fantastic staff at our bus stations, the subway, you can see the service that they provide. It's absolutely second to none. And they're out in all hours, all weathers, to make sure that you get home and you move on. The easiest thing in the world to do is nothing. That's the easy thing to do. We've been working very hard over recent years to get more money for bus, to get more money invested in the public transport network of the west of Scotland. We've made a lot of investments ourselves. Over the last few years, we've had to increase our budget for supporting socially necessary bus services by £2 million. Now in context, that brings it up to a total of 14 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but when compared with other areas, it's not a lot, and we're spreading the jam that gives us everything across the board. So when we started the process of doing the new RTS, we were very keen to make sure that we took the partnership with us, we took the public with us. We did a public survey, asked some very high-level questions, over 4,000 responses, couldn't believe it. Nearly every single one of those telling us to be bold and ambitious, and that's why a new RTS sets that framework. It's now approved by our partnership, approved by the Transport Minister, and is now a statutory document. But through that process, very early on, it was becoming apparent to us that it wasn't just us who felt that the bus network should be improved. We're hearing from our stakeholders, whether it was the council, whether it was the public, whether it was other agencies, or health boards, or whoever it may be. Bus wasn't good enough, so we said, okay, let's do this piece of work with Glasgow City Council, as Councillor Millar referred to earlier on, to say, are there options in the 2019 Act? Yes, there are. They could be useful in taking things forward. But we know, as a public authority, we need to follow the process. As the Centre for Cities is a think tank and Get Glasgow Moving and Ellie and our colleagues are perfectly entitled to say that we want to say what we want in a democratic society. But we, as a public authority, need to follow due process. So we started last November 2022, approved by our partnership for development of the Stratford Regional Bus Strategy. We laid out what we'd be looking at. One of the key things was the operational and funding model, always with the passenger at heart. We want the best deal for the passenger, to attract people back to bus and to make sure those dedicated public transport users out there get the service they need. In doing the case for change, as I said earlier on, extremely strong, and again, the key findings went to our partnership in September. The full report will be, if not already, on our website. I'll need to check actually. The full report will be there, and again it lays bare we need to do something about this. Now, we will be developing options to address those issues raised from the case for change, and we will be presenting them to our partnership board in March next year. And as I said earlier on, that will then be going to public consultation. Where the money comes from, where other factors filter into this, like the metro, other things, we don't know yet, but we will work those out. But one thing's for sure, we'll stick to that process. We will be absolutely wedded to that, to make sure that we get it right and we don't fall down at any hurdle that may come up in the future. It took Greater Manchester as an example, over 7 years and significant millions of pounds to develop the case for franchising. Different set of rules down there, and absolutely, just to be clear, we're not saying whether we're going down any particular route, franchising or not at the moment. We'll follow due process and get that out. But I can assure you, Catriona, we are committed as SPT, both at the political level and at the officer level, to do our best on the public transport network in the west of Scotland.
Christy, just give your microphones next to you, I'll come to you next. What's the Green perspective on the pace of change? I mean, this is obviously a fundamental issue for your society.
Yes, absolutely. It has been incredibly frustrating. Waiting for powers that we need in such a passive way, it feels like we can't do anything until we do have these very important powers. However, I think that at the moment, given that they are so close to coming forward without any more delays, hopefully, we do need to make sure that we're at that moment that we are ready to take forward that work. And it will be immensely frustrating, again, if when those powers do become available, we're not in a position to start doing that work immediately. I don't think anyone will forgive anybody in a position of power who allows that to happen. So I do think if there's any steps that can be taken now, such as, for example, procurement exercises that could be done to, for example, that can be set up, ready to go, to find somebody to start the first round of business case development, for example, and that would be a really helpful thing. I also think it's really important that we keep the vision. We keep building that vision from within, from a local level. And for example, looking towards places like Highland Council, who are doing really interesting work on looking at whether they can operate more of their own bus services themselves. There are already powers in place within the Transport Authority to do that. We already contract out a number of socially necessary bus routes to private operators who have backed out of them. That's public subsidy going directly back to the private operators. There may be another way of doing that. There may be a way for SBT or the Transport Authority to take on that role of greater operation of buses which have been removed from the network. So yeah, I think I'm glad that SBT have actually said that they're looking at that and they're keeping an eye on it, obviously following due process. But that is really exciting and really important that that level of ambition continues.
And Angus, Glasgow City Council, are you ready to race out the tracks as soon as possible?
Well, I think what I would say is that there's, and as I said in my opening remarks, there's very clear political support in Glasgow to explore the use of franchising powers. And I think at the last council election last year, 83 out of 85 of the councillors were elected on manifestos to explore franchising. Now that we have the regulations that will allow us to do that coming online, the due process that Bruce referred to needs to now be carried out, and I think that needs to be seriously looked at. And I think we as the council, we published our bus governance route map last year, which set out how we were going to approach these questions around exploring franchising and also partnership working with the sector, and utilising, for example, statutory improvement partnership that's also an option. And so we've set out how we would intend to approach that. There is a kind of underlying question there which is called out, which is at what level does that work get taken forward? Is it at the city level or is it indeed at a regional level? And I think we recognise that buses don't kind of start at Ayleston and stop at Yoker. It is a regional kind of network. So while Glasgow as a city council will certainly want to be extremely closely involved in and a key driver of that work, we appreciate that SBT are now in a position where they're taking forward that first stage of options appraisal, so we want to really engage with that and see where that goes and see how that due process can be carried out. But certainly there is a recognition that there is a need for change. There's a recognition that we need to work together, actually, with stakeholders and with operators in the here and now to secure the improvements to the bus network, to make the improvements that we need, but also a recognition that we need to be actively exploring some of these governance options like franchising over the medium term, and that's what we'll be actively engaged in.
I mean, for very obvious reasons, we keep mentioning Manchester and Andy Burnham. And it seems to me in Glasgow most of the relationships between most of the parties are pretty good. But I'm sure you all check heraldscotland.com routinely. But just before I came out this evening to come here, I had a chat with the PR people for the Eastdale brothers who run McGill's buses, who aren't happy at the talk of franchising. They were talking about wacky campaigners and a Vladimir Putin style attempt to steal their business, and suggested that Valerie, chief executive of SBT, would like to retire early and go and play golf because she's more suited to a life of leisure rather than running a company. So, when I said belligerent earlier in the evening, don't know who I was thinking about. So you have that you have to kind of face down, but then you also have, I think quite all political parties do agree that something has to be done about the transport system. It is a part of the political issue. There is sort of scrapping between various different political parties, particularly Labour, who Paul Sweeney, for example, has talked about how Glasgow City Council just doesn't have anyone who is a strong enough leader to take forward franchising and to kind of face down the opposition. So I'm going to stick with you on that one, Angus, and I just wonder what you think political leadership and political will, and whether we do need a sort of more charismatic anti-government style position that you know.
Well, I think, as I just said, there is that collective political leadership in terms of desire to engage with the future of public transport in the city. Both I, as the convener for transport, and as the leader of the council, have been quite vocal on that in terms of the opportunities that exist under the franchising powers that are now being delivered. I think the report is actually quite clear that kind of proposal that you require some kind of metro mayor setup isn't actually required. That's obviously a model under which the UK government down south has sought to empower and invest in city regions. They have made a political choice to link that investment and the evolution of those powers to setting up of this kind of one mayor type figure. That's certainly not something that is required in order for cities and city regions to be empowered. And I think what we're clear on now with the franchising regulations coming into force, with the opportunity to be taken forward at a regional level and at city level in terms of exploring the use of those powers and what that could mean theoretically, and in terms of business case development, what that would mean in terms of practical outcomes for the city of Glasgow and the wider region. There's an opportunity there to seriously take that forward. The powers are now here. I think, as I said at the beginning, though, what is absolutely clear is that this would require resource. It would require national investment from government in order to make the system viable, in order to support development of the business case work, in order to then support the development of an actual franchising system. And I think that's been sometimes a little bit missing from the discussion around franchising in the past. That it is actually going to require significant investment. So I think to Bruce's point, that's really for the business case development to kind of figure out, well, what would it actually cost, and then what are the resourcing mechanisms that you would get for that, what would be our asks. But we need to now take that serious business case development forward, that due process that's been referred to actually see, well, what would this mean in practice, and how can that be taken forward. And I think that's really something that now one has to be able to do.
Bruce, maybe not the first time that you've been compared to Vladimir Putin, I don't know. But how do you feel about the prospect of sort of bringing everybody forward together on the options around franchising?
Not easy at all, and I think that's why I keep saying about the process. We need to stick to that process and go through it piece by piece, whether that's by funding, whether that's by about any other factor. We need to make sure that we get it right. The council law is absolutely right. The system down south is very different to up here, and both in terms of what city regions and authorities and the transport powers and the mayoral powers. It's not the same up here. And it's really important to know, and we made these points when the 2019 Act was in development. I mean, SPT's bus policy, 10-point plan as we used to call it, goes back to 2011-12, so we've been fighting for a lot of this stuff for a long time to try and make bus better. But there are elements of the 2019 Act which even should we choose, and partnership approve it, the councils approve it, we get that business case right to go down the franchising route, there's still issues within that legislation that concern us. For example, at one point in the legislation, the business case needs to go through a 3-member panel appointed by the traffic commissioner who will make a decision, and that we always said, how's that democratically accounted? How's that right? Who are the panel? What's their job? What's their position? What gives them the right to decide what you, the people of the west of Scotland, the 2.3 million people that are in the SPT area, have to rely on 3 people in a panel? That's just for an example. We're not going down that road just now, but those are the kind of issues that we need to address. So there are many factors here, Catriona, about what to do with bus. But we're going through that process, we have faith in that process, and we'll get the right answer over coming months when we go there. Just coming back to what you said at the top though, the one thing that people don't perhaps forget, people perhaps forget, In Manchester, franchising relies on private bus operators. We need to remember that. It's not, run by Andy Burke, the whole thing. It's specified by them. Contractors bid to win the contracts. And that's something that we need to bear in mind as we go on. There are some of the best people I've worked with in public transport over 25 years have been in the private sector bus industry. Have been passionate believers in bus and want to take it forward and have done an amazing job. There are others who aren't that. And I think you can see that in the public sector as well. So we need to work with the right people. We're already in the Glasgow Bus Partnership, and we're grateful to see Joe Aiken here, the chair of the Glasgow Bus Partnership, working with the operators at the moment, making the best of what we've got and where we're going in the future. So it's going to be challenging, Catriona, but I think the partnership that we have just now, sitting up here with our other organisations, we'll get the right answer, we'll deliver the right result.
Christy, I was going to ask Ellie for her perspective as a wacky campaigner, but did you have any thoughts on that?
If I can be I'll try and be coherent, but I think, it's very piecemeal. It can feel a very piecemeal picture in Scotland and in Glasgow with different actors responsible for different areas. We've got the council, we've got SPT, creating policy, we've got the Scottish Government with the powers. It's all very complicated, I think. I think maybe down south it's not quite as complicated as that. We've also got the transport authorities down south that have more power and they have more ability to raise revenue. So I think it's a very different situation. I think the will is there, as Angus has said. I believe that the will is there to do that. We do have the opportunities coming down the pipeline, and I suppose we need to wait and see if that can actually yield those results that we also desperately want to see. But
You're always the optimist, so I know the answer.
It's almost a compliment, Ellie. In fact, it is a compliment. Yes, a compliment.
Being a wacky campaigner. What I wanted to say, I'm actually, because I've been involved in this campaign, unbelievably clued up about Scottish transport policy. You wouldn't believe it, but what I wanted to say is the report is very clear that yes, maybe we do need to adjust the governance arrangements in the stratified region. That does need to happen, but we cannot allow that to delay the process of re-regulating the buses with the franchising powers. That has to come first. That's why we need to work with SPT, which is our transport authority at the moment. There are 12 local authorities represented on the SPT board. We've got councillors in the audience, I know, from quite a few of those authorities, and I'd like to thank you for coming. So we need all of those councillors on the SPT board to be very clear that they want this to happen and to be working together through SPT, because they're all represented there, to make it happen. And then once we've got our bus franchise up and running, and we have contracted out some of the services to private companies, hopefully we have a new publicly owned operator running parts of the network as well. Then when it comes to the next phase of the report, which is 5 to 10 years, where we're looking at the long-term funding that will be required and potential governance reforms, that can happen around the bus franchising network that we've already built.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one more sort of slightly quicker thing, and then we'll open up to questions, so hopefully everybody has a question ready. I'm aware that we don't have anyone from the bus company on the panel, and I know that any time I interview McGill's or interview First, for example, they talk about the fact that franchising will not be any different at all, because it doesn't matter whose name is above the door, it's a phrase that they like to use. Things won't change unless congestion is dealt with and various other issues. And Bruce, I wondered what you would say to that phrase about it doesn't matter whose name's above the door, there will be improvements.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that there are organisations, national, international organisations who run buses who, in some parts of the country, work quite happily under a franchise system. In other parts of the country are against it. And I think you have to make the best of it. When you look at the London system, everybody holds that up as the barometer by which all other systems are judged. It costs a lot of money. There's a lot of fresh air getting carried around in London buses, and that's something that is being addressed down there just now. I think from our perspective, we're working with the operators just now. We'll go through the process. As I said, apologies for saying process again, but we will follow that process and we'll get the right result at the end of it. We'll work with the bus operators, whether that's in a partnership situation, whether that's in a franchise situation, whatever it is. We want to work with them to make sure the bus network gets better. As the report shows, and in our case for change, for the regional bus strategy, between 2009-10 and 2018-20, bus passage dropped by 32%. That's the reality. You're any business, you're going to go, there's a problem here. How do we fix it? How do we get people back on board? And we need to work with them, they need to work with us, we need to work with the councils, we need to look at road space allocation, we need to look at bus priority, we need to look at all of those things. And so, whether it's a voluntary partnership or whether it is some sort of franchising model, as I say, we're not wedded to any one of those. We have faith in that process. We'll try and do our best to improve the bus network in the West of Scotland. Thanks,
Angus, I'm just going to come to you on this one and then I'm going to open up to questions.
Remind me of the questions.
What was the question? The question was, bus companies say that franchising won't make a difference because there's too many issues with congestion, with driver hiring and retention. There are issues that are not about franchising. How would you tackle them? Does it matter who's making some of them?
I think certainly, I think what's clear is that governance and the future of governance in terms of being to do with franchising, what's the partnership models, etc., that is a really important part of the conversation about the future of buses, the future of public transport, but it's not the only part of the conversation. And I think those who would argue that we need to be bringing journey times down, that we need to be looking at ways that we increase bus priority measures, all of these things that are going to improve the network regardless of who the actual operator is. That is a valid point, because franchising alone doesn't solve those issues. So that's work that we are taking forward already as a council with SBT, with our colleagues in bus operators as part of the Glasgow Bus Partnership, for example, looking at, with Scottish Government funding, Transport Scotland funding, looking at how we bring in more bus priority measures to improve journey times, to improve the reliability of services. And that's all a really important part of the conversation. And even as we have that conversation around exploring franchising or other governance models, it is actually really important that we don't lose sight of, well, what is it that we can be doing now, and how do we increase investment and increase the amount of resources that we're putting in to improve the experience of bus journeys in the bus network now. That's an important part of the conversation as well.
Do you have someone who's moving the mic? Sounds Ellie a hand has gone up very swiftly over here.
Yeah, Councillor Stephen McKay from Inverclyde Council, just to show us a bit of life out with Glasgow and the population of Glasgow is smaller than the population of all of us who live around Glasgow. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I very much welcome the report, and I very much welcome the ambition that has been shown in the report and the ambition being shown in the panel, but you need to deliver on that ambition, and it's going to take resources to deliver. So I suppose to maybe mix things up a wee bit, do we actually think that the bus passenger has the political clout to actually get what they're looking for when we compare the bus passenger to the rail passenger? There's been quite significant investment in rail services, there's been quite radical changes in rail services. We've seen ScotRail nationalised, for example. We've seen new lines open. We've seen the recent example of removing peak fares as well, which made it cheaper for me to get to Glasgow tonight, I have to say. So do we actually think that the powers that be are listening to the bus passengers? The bus passengers is a strong enough voice?
Mr. McKay, thanks very much. for that. I'm going to take a couple of questions at the time you were next, so I'll come to you. Just gentlemen agree with you. I feel like I'm doing question time.
I'm not going to stand up because I'm conscious that the camera is behind me and nobody wants to see the back of my head. So given that the report outlines that the regional economy is worth about £50 billion, right? And given that the report also outlines there's an approximately 4.5% underperformance in the regional economy. If we were to reverse this question, if we already had a franchise integrated transport model and we were considering deregulation for the first time, and we were told you're potentially risking 4.5% of the of the national GDP in this region, would anybody seriously consider the arguments of those bus companies? My question to you is, we've talked a lot about the resources required to make this happen and how much this could cost, and that funding's got to come from somewhere. Can we afford not to do this when we've got social deprivation in this region, when we've got massive economic hurdles to overcome as we recover from COVID and the impacts of Brexit? Yes, this is going to cost. Can we afford not to do it?
Can I just ask you what capacity you're speaking?
I'm a member of Get Glasgow Movement.
Right, actually I'm going to stick with those two questions and come to the panel because those are quite yeah, if you so we had two quite wide-ranging questions there, and I'm worried that we won't get specific answers to them if we move on too quickly. So the first question from Mr. McKee was very interesting. Is the bus passenger respected enough to make a political change? Ellie, do you want to go with that one? I was saying yes from someone in the audience.
I'll answer it as quickly as I can. I mean, that's been Get Glasgow Moving's mission over the last 7 years, is to raise the profile of bus users and to make sure that bus users' voices are heard. And in the last month, we have been involved in launching a new campaign called Better Buses for Strathclyde, which I will do a pitch for. And that aims to go even further and to link up all 12 of the local authorities, bus passengers in all 12 of the local authorities in Strathclyde, to demand that the SPT moves forward with the franchising powers. So we're doing all we can to raise the profile of bus users, and let's hope the message is coming across loud and clear.
But are they respected enough? What do you think?
I would argue that no, they're not at the moment, and that's because the service is so bad. You know, you do only use it as a last resort if you haven't got a car and you haven't got other ways of travelling around. And unfortunately, we have so many people who are in that position in our region. I think that bus users are respected, and the only way that they are going to be respected going forward is if we can give everybody a world-class service and put that investment that we desperately need into improving it.
Angus, I'll ask you to answer that question and also the question of can we afford not to make significant change?
I think certainly there has been historically in Scotland, certainly since deregulation, a focus on other modes of transport as opposed to bus in terms of the political conversation. And I think it's incumbent on all of us councillors, officials, whoever, to try and rebalance, redress that balance, that imbalance. Certainly I think there needs to be a really strong statement of support for bus, for the future of bus as a key part of the public transport network. And I think the point that I was trying to make earlier around, so for example, in the discussion around Clyde Metro and the opportunity that exists there, trying to emphasise that that doesn't just mean a new kind of tram system or light rail system, that actually means an integrated system of transport that could encompass all modes and that's really kind of addressing all the needs of all the different parts of the city region, whatever mode is best suited to serve that particular part. I think having that kind of multimodal kind of emphasis is going to be really important so that we're not just falling into always talking about trains or always talking about new infrastructure like trams in Edinburgh or metro in Glasgow as people might see it. I mean, I think in terms of the second question, And as I alluded to at the very beginning, you know, absolutely, if we had a regulated, publicly owned or publicly controlled system today, there's no way the political appetite would exist to deregulate. And we are in some ways living with the legacy of that deregulation and that privatisation in the 1980s and 90s. And there is a really strong case for you know, considerable investment and improvement to public transport, in kind of seriously exploring, urgently exploring the governance options that are available in the Transport Act. And that's why we need to take that forward you know, with alacrity. So you know, I very much welcome the work that SPT's beginning to embark on, and we need to all kind of be engaged in that process.
Christy, can you take your thoughts on both of those?
Yeah, I think absolutely. But the challenge is how we do go about that. We've got the system as it is just now, and we are testing out how we use that. We operate within that system just now, and provide better public transport, more affordable public transport. For example, free public transport, free buses for under 22s. That's testing the existing current model as it is, and seeing if that can operate properly to provide that decent service. We're also in Glasgow working on a pilot for free public transport more widely to test out, can the existing service, can the existing model of operation provide step up to the challenge of making that more usable, increasing ridership and things like that. So I think the challenge is just under what system we do it, and the bus franchising is just another tool potentially there to enable us to save money. So we do need to be looking at it all in the round and together, which does make it incredibly frustrating and incredibly slow at times. What was I going to say? Yeah, I'll let Bruce.
Bruce, can I ask you just to speak specifically to the issue of our bus passengers respected?
So that's a really interesting question. I think it's interesting when you speak to business people and other stakeholders and you tell them some facts and figures like 75% of public transport passengers in Scotland travel by bus and rail's round about 15 to 18%. Some of them actually don't believe you because rail has got such a high profile. And that's very concerning. I remember we had conversations with big businesses in the centre of Glasgow and did some surveys, or they did some surveys, and the results came back and they saw that the vast majority of their footfall came from bus passengers. They didn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. They just weren't aware of that. So whether it's business community, I think from a political perspective, the bus passenger at last is stepping out from being a bridesmaid to being a bride. With the 2019 Act and the profile that bus and public transport is getting. I think that's absolutely right. Just one thing, if you'll forgive me, Catriona. One area that is really a huge challenge, and we're saying this is sitting in Glasgow City Chambers, rural public transport, island connectivity. If it's difficult to make public transport work in an urban area, it is even more challenging to do so in rural areas. And that's something we at SPT, the guys in our network planning team, our team in policy, we're continually looking at to see what we can do better. And if you're forgiving again, because just in the bus contribution to the economy, can we afford not to do it and widen that? We can't afford not to do it environmentally, economically and socially. That's the importance of public transport to the people and communities in the west of Scotland. And as I said earlier on, we are collectively much more sophisticated in our understanding of the benefits of public transport and active travel to wider society and to the individual. Whether it's health and well-being, we've got our MyBus service. Sometimes it's the only time a person gets out of the house in a week is when the MyBus comes and takes them to the Asda, they have a cup of tea, do a bit of shopping, go up the road, meet a couple of their friends. That's the people we're here to serve. That's what we want to do. So.
As with so many things, there's such a long shadow of factors, comments about self-respecting and over 15 taking the bus. This is, here's the question, could you pass it
Hi, thank you. I'm Councillor Alison Anne and I've come in from Renfrewshire tonight. I want to pick up the theme that Bruce introduced there about rural connectivity. I supported the Get Glasgow Moving campaign for a number of years, and at the beginning of the year we launched our Better Buses Renfrewshire. You get that name first, I'll just make that clear. We launched that at the beginning of the year, and it's been one of the most publicly galvanising campaigns that we've been involved in politically. We've had a couple of town hall meetings that have been packed, absolutely packed, and we've had people travelling from adjacent constituencies, from East Renfrewshire into Renfrewshire, for example, because the issues that are faced are common across the west of Scotland. They're not just confined to built up areas. So what I want to ask the panel to discuss a little bit more detail is, Bruce, you talked about rural areas, but how we define rural areas in Scotland could be a couple of miles up here from Paisley.
Yeah.
You know, we're not talking about having to get 2 ferries and you know a donkey and a cat. You know, the rural economy. We're talking about built-up areas that are very, very closely built together, if you like. But they might as well be in the middle of nowhere in terms of their connectivity. It's quite common for people who live at the back of Johnston or places like Houston, for example. It takes them almost 3 hours to get to the local hospital because they've got to get 3 buses and then you factor in the changeover times. Shift workers from places like the Beeston in Glasgow getting back to Renfrewshire, it's an absolute nightmare. You know, they've got to get taxis back. So they're just a couple of examples. So could the panel speak a little bit more about how this vision for franchising public ownership, which I absolutely support and there's huge public appetite for it, how do we connect that up so that it truly serves the population of Scotland, the west of Scotland as we're talking today, and not just the major conurbations? Thanks.
Thank you. Can you come to this gentleman to speak?
First, I just think a point on whether or not passengers are respected. I do have a question as well. Just from my personal experience, and I assume probably most people who use the bus on a regular basis, in recent years we've seen services cut in terms of service frequency. The reliability has been very, very poor. It's almost like you're being treated with a lack of dignity, is probably the way I would describe it. You go for a bus, you genuinely don't know what's going to turn up. Just as an example, today, the bus to get into this event was about 20 minutes late. The real-time tracking information was useless. You almost gave up looking for it. Speaking to someone at the bus stop yesterday waiting for another bus, the bus had not turned up 5 days in a row for something more to work. You know, that's actually impacted on productivity and the economy. I've made many, many complaints to bus operators at the services. You always get the same responses. Even talking about subsidised services, I've made many, many complaints to SBT about subsidised services. They've been upheld every single time. But the operators still operate those services, they're still running those contracts. It's good for them to the services not turning up, pure driver behaviours. So it's like there's nobody who you can complain to, there's nobody who can listen to the bus passenger because there's nothing anyone can really do about it. We're kind of relying on the operators to run the services anyway. And it is a real lack of respect. You would not get that if you were a rail passenger contacting the Scottish Government, you would not get that if you were a passenger contacting local politicians. So for anyone to pretend that it's just not the case, that there's a real lack of dignity shown to bus users. It's specifically as their sole means of getting around within the area. But my actual question, and hopefully you're able to answer this, can I go to Bruce? It's in terms of XPT's ability to run their own services, it can be aside, services that are franchised by one or different contracts. Existing subsidised services are kind of some of the routes and some of the sort of where they operate and the times they operate. I think they're in need of review. They kind of some of them have been changed for years and clearly aren't serving the purpose they were originally intended for, and some of the routes don't really make sense anymore. But is there any appetite at HBT in terms of running as an operator, for these services that are currently maybe contracted out to some of the smaller operators? Would HBT want to run these services?
Thank you. Can you check the document on? Sure. I'm also aware that we were meant to finish questions at 6:55, so I'm just going to run us on for a little bit, but I won't get offended if people get up and start leaving, because I know we're meant to finish at 7.
Hi, I just wanted to make a point about funding, because I don't think that...
Does it come to a question?
It does come to a question, yeah. So I understand that we're looking at funding coming from the Scottish Government, capital funding, but there are also other funds, such as the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Ownership Fund that comes from the UK Government. For example, Cllr have got a £13 million grant to update their stables and reintroduce Clydesdale horses, but there isn't anything in terms of transport. I don't think that they're going to be putting any carriages, unfortunately. But, so I think maybe these funds are forgotten about, and maybe the disconnect is that people who want to self-organise and create solutions, such as on-demand services for rural aspects, we don't know how to create grants and the applications for those grants. So maybe that is where we could get councillors and people involved, for people who want to participate, to make these applications for that funding, because it is out there. So that's just what I wanted to make about, obviously the funding issue.
I'm going to ask for slightly snappier answers, just because I would like to fit in another couple of questions before we finish. Bruce, we may as well come to you on that XPT question. Is there any appetite contributed with regards to the routes that...
Firstly, just your initial points about the bus passenger's dignity and respect for the bus passenger, that's entirely unacceptable. That's if people are treated poorly like that, and the bus passenger, just as much as any member of society, deserve to be treated with respect. And there are challenges facing the bus industry in getting their services to run on time. There are many reasons for that, but that for me is absolutely unacceptable. And again, whatever comes out of our regional bus strategy will have the passenger at its heart, so we'll hope to see a step change in that. In terms of municipal operation, again, it's an option on the table. You only have to go back, I would say maybe about 8, 9, 10 years. There were 140 operators in the west of Scotland. Now there's 40. That's through consolidation, through others being bought over, whatever it may be. As I said earlier on, we put more and more money into investing in bus services, spreading that everything across the region. Challenges for operators in making that work. So, as I say, we at SPT keep all options on the table, and they will remain on the table as we move through to finish off the regional bus strategy.
Angus, with regards to funding, are all options on the table? What would be the benefits of looking elsewhere for funds like the Levelling Up Fund?
Well, I think in terms of improving public transport, I think it goes without saying we look anywhere that there's available funding to support improvements to public transport. There's various Scottish Government funds that are being delivered around, for example, Bus Partnership Fund to support bus priority works, and we're engaging with them as an SVT on supporting the business case development around governance. On Levelling Up, I would caution that Levelling Up, I don't think, is a viable or appropriate funding source for the operation of a franchising model. It's obviously one of capital works, and also there was a specific category within the Levelling Up Fund, prospectus for transport funding. For a transport-focused project. Glasgow's project that we bid for was for the M8 motorway cap, and unfortunately that, along with indeed projects across all different constituencies right across Glasgow for local regeneration projects, after the Kiloh stables project, which was successful, all subsequent projects were rejected because the UK Government moved goalposts in terms of what funding criteria were for that at the last minute. But yeah, certainly it's all for the reassurance that whatever funding sources can be identified to support improvements of public transport and deliver on the Glasgow transport strategy, we will certainly be continuing to try and access those funding sources.
And Ellie, you might be best pleased to speak to how franchising would fit in with the wider rural connectivity.
Yeah, to answer Councillor's question.
We got back to you in the end.
I would say have a good look at the report, because there's not remember crucial that there's a case study on the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital just showing how poorly served it is at the moment and how close it is to Cardonald Station and how easy it would be to put on a bus service that connected with train services to get people very quickly to that hospital. And that can only be done, like properly integrated, by regulating the buses, taking the buses back into public control with the franchising powers, so that you can put on those services and make them connect seamlessly. So hopefully that's one example, but there'll be thousands of other examples where hospitals and other key public services across the whole of Strathclyde are being really underserved at the moment. And we can make these simple changes if we utilise franchising to be able to connect them up better. And I would hope that when and if and when the SPT puts together the franchising framework, that's what they start with, the services that people need to access and how they can best get there.
Thank you. And Christy, just on that issue of funding, if you could.
Thank you. So I was just going to say that we don't question our funding of the NHS, for example, because it's a vital public service and essential to the well-being of our citizens. And I think we need to view transport in the same way. Transport is equally as vital to the well-functioning and health of all citizens. But in practical terms, we will have powers over workplace parking levy, for example. That's potentially a real good opportunity to funnel money into public transport that we need. And also low emission zones, and also under a system of franchising, we would have that money coming into the Transport Authority itself, as opposed to profits going through the private operators and disappearing, if you like. So I think that's another potentially really valuable and interesting opportunity there through exploring franchising. Is there an opportunity to raise more money and then pay the operators in a slightly different way?
Thank you. So a very persistent hand here. Anyone agree? Do you consider?
Good evening. My name's John Cllr. I was actually in Strathclyde PPE for a number of years in the 1970s, 1980s, and I can fully sympathise with the position that Bruce finds himself in tonight. But I want to challenge the panel. Are we being too introspective? We're looking at the F word as being the answer, and it could be the answer, but it's only one of a number of answers. I could point you to deregulated systems south of the border that are operating perfectly well. This region has got a reputation for ingenuity and innovation. We've mentioned funding. There's a very successful weekend bus service operating, which was originally designed for ramblers, in the Yorkshire Dales, which is supported, I guess, about 25% insofar as revenue contributions to it are concerned. I'm not fully up to date with the details, but it's supported about 25%. People like bistro pub owners pay towards it because it means they can have a party which doesn't have to have a teetotaler or a nominated driver within it. Local people can also use it in the reverse direction to get to the market towns when they haven't got a weekday service or a very sparse weekday service. Another example, are we really looking at the benefits to the passengers? Do the passengers really want to know the details of how that bus was secured? What they want to know, as has already been said many times, is that the bus is going to be there when it's expected to be there, and that depends on the environment in which it operates. So, as well as looking at the bus operators and the Transport Authority, you have got to look at the Highways Authority, you have got to look at the Planning Authority, because it's the weaknesses of these authorities, as well as the Transport Authorities, in previous years, that have led us to the situation that we're in. But again, I come back to the point, there are ways round it. Good buses need good roads, and get the both the bus operators, the drivers, get their opinions as to where the problems are, and get the Highways Authority and the planners involved as well.
Right, thank you. Can I have some hands up as well? You're just in front, this lady here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Bruce has mentioned my name already. I'm Joan Aitken. I used to be the Traffic Commissioner for Scotland. 16 years I regulated the bus industry and overtied any bus operator that didn't run to route or to time and didn't show passengers the dignity and respect and overtied me. If it was ever me at that bus stop, the bus didn't turn up. But I was asked to chair the Glasgow Bus Partnership Steering Group, and that's been a real privilege to do that because I'm a bus user, and the getting it right for the bus passenger and those who don't currently use the buses is absolutely essential to the well-being of any community, urban or rural. I'm slight because of my longevity in work and seeing so many public policies stem from good ideas but not necessarily have good outcomes. I'm slightly worried about this fixation on franchising in this discussion because there's good, I can see lots of good arguments, I can see where it all comes from, but I'm terribly worried that we get this wrong, because what really worries me is that to go down the franchising model will take time, as the report absolutely fairly brings out. It will take a lot of time, and it will take a huge amount of money to be used on those processes. I mean, even for us trying to get, for the bus partnership, trying to get money from Scottish Government at the moment is glacial, it appears to me. Glacial, and the thought of going into that sort of environment again for franchising, and it stymies other things, and it becomes a terrible distraction to what we actually need. And Mr. Carr behind us has said many things I say, which is, and you've alluded to as well, Cap, which is we need to get the operating environment right. We need to make sure the buses can get to the people, that the bus stops aren't being blocked. We need to do what we are doing in the bus partnership, which is to look at fares, to look at the network. We're doing a lot of work on the network at the moment, to look at affordability, to look at where people want to go, and also the customer service standards. Absolutely, absolutely. And we do that with the operators, with consumers, with SPT, with Glasgow Council. We're always looking at what other people are doing. And we are making some successes, I would have to say. The fares, looking at the affordability of fares, absolutely essential to get fares, for the single fares down. So can I just say that there is value in looking at lots of other ways of doing it to secure the end and not being fixated just on franchising. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off. I mean, I think we have two questions here that sort of follow a theme, and we can wrap them into one. So I'm going to take two more. Can I have a show of hands if you want to ask a question? The gentleman with grey top just there.
Thank you. David Kelly, Community Transport Association. We represent across the west of Scotland about 42 local charities, community groups and social enterprises that are delivering their own transport services, so responding to a lot of the gaps that we've been talking about, lots of the unmet transport needs across the region, and doing that on a non-profit basis. So I guess my question is if we're moving towards some kind of franchising model, what is the role and what is the place of community-owned non-profit operators within that? There's always going to be gaps within the transport system, particularly with people with disabilities, and we know that on a current trajectory we're not going to make the transport system as accessible as it needs to be for those people and for the rural communities that have been mentioned. So what is the future role for community transport within that picture? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the gentleman just in front as well. If you can keep it very brief, I would just greatly appreciate it.
It will be, yeah. I think Bruce mentioned 30% or something down on bus passengers, or hemorrhage in bus use over the years. Cost must be a major factor in that to the individual. How do we get the prices of the tickets down fast? And how much money should the government be putting in to get people back on the buses, which ultimately will raise more revenue to invest in better busing?
Okay, thank you. So I think, Ellie, if we could focus on the question of, is the F word the answer? And that sort of encompasses John and John.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. I would say to Joan, who we've met a few times, that we've had bus partnerships in Scotland since 2001. There was a Transport Act in 2001 that introduced bus partnerships, and yet all of the issues that Bruce has outlined in the Case for Change, which that we have all experienced on the streets, what this man in the front row said, how he was treated on his way in here this evening, those problems are getting worse. We've fixated on franchising because it is a new power that is about to become available on the 4th of December, which will enable us to radically transform the status quo. And we have to do that because the status quo is failing. Just to very quickly say, we worked on a report 2 years ago with the former UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Professor Philip Alston, who's a human rights lawyer. And what he said in that report, which was obviously looking about how transport is such an important thing to enable people to enact their human rights, because if they can't access services, then they can't get help, they can't get education, etc. He said in that report, it's about time we realise partnerships are a tried and failed approach that need to be retired in favour of actual regulation of public transport. So that's what we're talking about. And I just say that the UK, with its policy of deregulation, is the only place in the world that tried that. It is a tried and failed experiment, and we need to move on.
Angus, if you could tackle that question and then also add in a bit about community mode to non-profit.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, I think so. Both of the questions, I think, are speaking to issues that need to be fully teased out as part of, and fully fleshed out rather, as part of a robust kind of evidence base that we need to build in terms of seeing how we want to move forward with the future of the public transport network in the city. That is the business case development process, and also a bit like a broken record there. There's clearly a compelling case for why franchising needs to be taken seriously explored, and explored with urgency. But we need that business case to show actually, well, what are the operating considerations of such a model? How would that be funded? What would the funding requirements be? And crucially, I think at the heart of all of this discussion, as I said earlier, needs to be what are the outcomes that we want to see? What are the outcomes that we want to see, and what's the best model to allow us to take that forward in terms of increasing affordability, in terms of increasing reliability, in terms of dictating or requiring certain routes to be serviced in certain communities. So I think that options appraisal process and that business case development process is the place that all that work needs to take place. I think that can absolutely include consideration of the role of community transport operators and local groups, which I think that needs to be part of any discussion around the future model of public transport in Glasgow, whatever the model is. But I think I would agree with much of what's been said today, across the panel. I think there is a fundamental point of, as much as we need to be seriously exploring franchising, it isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all in terms of some of the aspects of public transport that we need to tackle, some of the challenges that we need to tackle, but certainly it's something that we need to be taken seriously and seriously taken forward at the same time as we work in the meantime to try and address some of those challenges that we have around improving the reliability of bus services now, improving journey times of bus services now, and that's something that needs to be taken forward in concert.
Thank you. And Christy, I keep asking about funding issues, so I'm going to do it again. Could you speak to ticket prices, please, and then do something else to the same question?
I had a thread in there, but I'll try to bring it together. I think the trust really is an issue. You know, I think people's trust has been lost with the system as it is just now. We could obviously pile money into the system that we have just now. We could give private operators more money so that they can bring down fares. I think because that trust has been lost, there is still so many issues with people's experience on the buses. There has been a number of years where partnership working between the operators could have been improved to, for example, do that work of integrating tickets or capping fares. That could have been done by the status quo, by the current operators, and it simply hasn't. So I think at this point in time, the reason that we are fixated on franchising is because it is another option available, which may enable more of that to happen. So I think it's just and it's understandable that there does seem that there is an appetite for looking at this option, because simply put, the private operators have not stepped up and they have not delivered on what needs to be delivered. So yeah, the funding again.
Ticket prices, how do we lower ticket prices?
Well, I think it kind of falls back into that. You know, we could put more money into the system as we have it just now and try and do that, or we can look at those other options that we have coming forward. And I think it's an absolute must that we do look at that.
Thank you. Bruce, the final word goes to you, so make it a good one.
Pressure. Yeah, affordability of transport is something that came out loud and clear in the regional transport strategy development, and that's across the board. Whether you're in work, the in-work poverty, or whether you're a young person looking for a first job or go to college, travelling by public transport can be a rich person's game at some times, it would seem, and I'll never really get over the horror of putting the first fiver into the cash box to pay for a return. It's a very, very serious situation within Glasgow and across the west of Scotland, across the public transport. I know the Scottish Government are doing something just now, the Fair Fares Review, but yeah, operators set the fares. Unfortunately, money always, in this case, could help solve everything, but there is also a whole range of other factors. Within the bus industry, there's something, within the public transport industry particularly, there is the cyclic decline. Prices go up, passengers go down, investment goes down, congestion goes up, passengers go down. All those things lead into a cyclic decline. You need to get the balance right, but we need to have that affordable system for the west of Scotland. Again, that's something that is hugely challenging, but we will try and address. Just forgive me, just on the community transport thing. As you know, David, SBT's invested millions in community transport over the last few years. Key part of the future of transport in the west of Scotland for sure, particularly in rural areas. Some great companies out there doing an amazing job. So just to reassure you on that fact, thanks again for having us tonight.
I'm glad you didn't end on cycle of decline, because I feel like we have had a very constructive and interesting and lively discussion this evening, and that would be the best place to leave it. Thank you everyone for your patience. I know I've kept you a bit longer than promised. I feel like we could be here until midnight the way that things are going, but I am going to wrap it up there. Thank you to all of you for your questions and for attending. Thank you so much to you, Ellie, and Get Glasgow Moving for organising this, and my thanks to the panel. And I don't know, Ellie, if you want to say some final words.
Well, just to thank the panel and Catriona for doing an amazing job as our chair. Thank you very much. Sorry we ran over, but I think it was worth it when we saw the sea of hands in front of us. Thank you all for your engagement. There are plenty of reports, I think, still outside. Councillors from different local authorities, please feel free to pick up a bunch, take them, give them to your colleagues. As I said, we are doing a parliamentary launch in 2 weeks' time. If anybody's keen to come to that, hopefully meet Andrew Carter in person. If he's feeling better, then please also get in touch. But thank you so much, and join the Better Buses for Strathclyde campaign. You can pick up the reports.